Friends, if you want to watch the upcoming super exciting and highly anticipated movie Eenie Meanie 2025 in English, then you are definitely going to love today's video because we have a lot to talk about. And if you are visiting our channel for the very first time, make sure to subscribe to our channel right now because we bring you all the latest updates about movies, web series, entertainment news, behind-the-scenes stories, and everything related to the world of cinema. Now, coming to today's video, the movie we are going to discuss is called Eenie Meanie 2025. This is one of the most talked about films of the year, and we will break down every single detail about it. In this video, we're going to cover what this movie is all about, its storyline, star cast, and which actors are playing which roles. We will also talk about the performance of the lead actors and supporting cast, and we will share what makes their characters so special in the movie. Not only that, we will discuss where you can watch this movie, whether it will be released in theaters on OTT platforms or available later on satellite TV. We will give you complete information about which platform or channel will stream this film so you don't miss out on the action when it drops. We'll also dive deep into the technical department of the movie, from cinematography, editing, and sound design to special effects and production quality. We'll talk about the creative team behind the movie, including the director, writers, music composers, and the entire crew who worked hard to bring this film to life. Along with that, we'll discuss the music department in detail, the soundtrack, background score, and how the music adds to the movie's overall mood and energy. Apart from this, we will explore the pre-production phase of the movie, when it was announced, how the casting was finalized, and how the story was developed. Then, we'll move to filming details, the locations where the movie was shot, how long the shooting took, and the challenges faced by the cast and crew during production. After that, we will take a closer look at the post-production process, including the editing, visual effects, and how the final version of the movie was polished before its release. We are also going to talk about the budget of the film and discuss how much was invested in its making. Along with that, we'll cover the box office expectations, how well the movie is projected to perform, what critics are predicting, and whether this film has the potential to break records. This movie is already creating a lot of buzz, and fans are waiting eagerly to see how it performs financially and critically. And, of course, we cannot forget the storyline of the movie. I'll give you a small review and sneak peek into the plot, without spoiling too much, so you'll know what makes this movie worth watching. We'll talk about the kind of emotions, twists, and thrills the story delivers, and why this film is becoming one of the most anticipated releases of 2025. Lastly, we'll share some fun and interesting facts about the movie, behind-the-scenes moments, secrets from the set, unexpected cameos, and all those little details that make this film even more exciting for fans. So, friends, make sure to stay tuned till the end of the video because we have so much to cover and you won't want to miss any of it. Now, without wasting any more time, let's start the video and dive deep into everything you need to know about Eenie Meanie 2025. The plot of Eenie Meanie 2025 unfolds like a roller coaster ride filled with tension, mystery, and unexpected turns, keeping you guessing from start to finish. The movie opens in a quiet, almost peaceful setting where everything seems normal on the surface, but there's an underlying sense that something is about to shatter. Instead of jumping straight into the chaos, the story slowly builds suspense, giving us little hints about secrets, lies, and hidden connections between the characters. It doesn't completely follow a traditional three-act structure. Instead, it experiments with time, perspective, and shifting narratives, creating an immersive experience where you never fully know who to trust or what to expect next. Early in the film, we meet the central characters whose lives seem unrelated at first, but as the story progresses, their paths begin to intertwine in ways that feel both shocking and inevitable. The director plays with fragmented storytelling, sometimes taking you into the past to reveal motives and at other times jumping ahead to moments of intense consequence. These shifts are seamless and clever, pulling you deeper into the mystery rather than confusing you. One of the most compelling aspects of the narrative is how it manipulates perspective. We see events through different characters' eyes, and each time we get a new piece of the puzzle, our understanding of the story changes. What you think you know in the first half of the film gets completely challenged by the midpoint, where a massive turning point flips the entire plot upside down. There's a scene in the middle of the film where everything accelerates, Secrets are exposed, allegiances break, and the stakes rise sharply. From this moment on, the pace quickens and tension takes over every frame. The conflicts become more personal and raw, moving beyond external challenges and diving into the characters' deepest fears, regrets, and desires. The second half of the movie leans into unpredictability, constantly surprising the audience with twists that feel earned rather than forced. Just when you think you've figured out what's happening, a new layer is revealed, shifting your perception entirely. Themes of trust, betrayal, power, and survival run strongly throughout, but what makes the narrative so gripping is how it blends emotional depth with suspense. Every decision the characters make carries weight, and the ripple effects of those choices collide in a dramatic, high-stakes climax where the tension finally explodes. The final act doesn't just resolve the surface-level conflicts. It ties back to subtle clues and foreshadowing from earlier, rewarding viewers who've been paying close attention. The ending lingers with ambiguity, leaving enough unanswered questions to keep the audience thinking long after the credits roll. This layered, non-linear storytelling approach gives Eenie Meanie, 2025, a unique edge, combining character-driven drama with relentless suspense, making the experience immersive and unpredictable at every turn. The characters in Eenie Meanie, 2025, are not just written to fill the story. They are crafted with depth, personality, and hidden complexities that slowly unravel as the narrative progresses. Each character feels like a living, breathing individual with flaws, strengths, and secrets, and the beauty of this film lies in how their personal journeys are tied so intricately to the larger story. At first, you're introduced to them as ordinary people dealing with seemingly ordinary problems, but as the layers peel back, you begin to realize that nothing about their lives is simple. Every character carries an emotional weight, and their choices push the plot forward in ways that feel natural yet unpredictable. One of the most fascinating aspects of their development is how their relationships evolve under pressure. Friendships are tested, alliances are formed and broken, and trust becomes the most fragile currency in the movie. The dynamics between the central characters are filled with tension, vulnerability, and quiet moments of connection, making their interactions feel real and grounded. Some of them begin as flawed, even unlikable, but over time, you start to understand their motivations, the scars they hide, the regrets they carry, and the desires that drive them. This gradual shift in perception keeps you emotionally invested because the more you learn about them, the more complex the story becomes. What makes the character arcs in Eenie Meanie truly engaging is that the film doesn't hand you neat, predictable transformations. Growth comes at a cost. Certain characters go through painful awakenings where they are forced to confront their past decisions, while others spiral deeper into darkness, consumed by their fears and ambitions. Some relationships that start with warmth and trust gradually fracture as secrets come to light, creating emotional turning points that hit hard because you've already grown attached to these people. There's a constant interplay between power and vulnerability. No one is entirely good or entirely bad, and every choice has rippling consequences that affect not just individual fates, but the entire narrative. The movie also does something clever by giving secondary characters as much nuance as the leads. Even the ones who initially seem minor have hidden depths, and as their stories unfold, you begin to see how interconnected their roles truly are. A small decision by one seemingly unimportant character can completely shift the trajectory of the plot later, creating a domino effect that changes everything. This level of layered writing adds richness to the viewing experience because it forces you to pay attention to every interaction and subtle gesture. By the time the story reaches its climax, the characters have been reshaped by everything they've endured. Some find redemption, others lose themselves entirely, and a few are left standing in the gray space between morality and survival. Their transformations feel earned, built up gradually through tension, conflict, and deeply personal stakes. Watching them break, rebuild, and adapt gives the film its emotional power and makes every twist resonate more strongly. The story isn't just happening to them. They are driving it forward with their decisions, mistakes, and growth. Eenie Meanie, 2025, thrives because its characters are not static pieces on a chessboard but dynamic, evolving forces who make the world of the film feel alive and unpredictable. The performances in Eenie Meanie, 2025, are layered, deeply immersive, and meticulously crafted, with the cast breathing life into their characters in ways that feel raw, unpredictable, and emotionally gripping. From the very first scene, you realize this isn't a film where actors are simply reciting lines. They embody these roles, disappearing into their characters so convincingly that you forget you're watching performances. Each actor brings a unique energy to the screen, and together, the ensemble creates a dynamic rhythm where every pause, every glance, and every subtle shift in body language speaks louder than dialogue. The lead performance anchors the entire narrative with quiet power and magnetic restraint. This isn't a role driven by loud speeches or dramatic breakdowns. Instead, it's a masterclass in controlled emotion. Watch closely. The smallest movements carry weight. The slight tightening of the jaw when a secret is kept. The flicker in the eyes when fear takes over. The careful hesitation before speaking a difficult truth. There's an intensity simmering beneath the surface, and when it finally erupts in key moments, the payoff is breathtaking. The transformation from guarded composure to emotional vulnerability adds a deep layer of humanity to the character, making every choice and consequence feel urgent and believable. The co-lead delivers a performance that's the perfect counterbalance, sharp, unpredictable, and full of restless energy. Where the lead embodies calm precision, the co-lead thrives in chaos, carrying scenes with wit, bite, and emotional volatility. Their chemistry is magnetic, evolving gradually from distrust and confrontation into a reluctant alliance filled with unspoken tension. Their shared moments are some of the film's most electric, especially when silence says more than words ever could. Then there's the antagonist, easily one of the most chilling performances in recent memory. What makes it so unsettling is the restraint. There's no exaggerated menace, no cartoonish villainy. Instead, the danger lies in subtlety. A soft voice where you expect anger, a carefully measured smile hiding sharp intent, and an unsettling calmness during scenes of confrontation. The antagonist dominates without raising their tone, creating a constant sense of unease. Every polite gesture and quiet line of dialogue drips with underlying threat, making you hold your breath whenever they're on screen. Among the supporting cast, a mentor figure delivers gravitas without ever feeling forced. They're the grounding presence, wise but flawed, compassionate yet carrying the weight of old regrets. There's also a wild-card character whose performance dances brilliantly between comic relief and quiet menace. One moment they're charming and unpredictable, and the next, they're capable of decisions that change the entire trajectory of the plot. It's a performance built on contrast, keeping the audience perpetually unsure of where their loyalties truly lie. Even smaller roles leave an impact because the film treats them with the same importance as its leads. A bartender has just 2 lines but delivers them with a knowing pause that hints at secrets yet to be uncovered. A neighbor's nervous laughter subtly reveals hidden tensions in the community. A security guard's silence during a pivotal moment carries a weight that dialogue couldn't match. These tiny details elevate the realism of the story, making the world of Eenie Meanie feel lived in and layered. Physical acting is just as vital here as spoken performance. The film uses movement, posture, and gesture as storytelling tools. A limp that wasn't there before hints at unseen violence. A character's sudden, deliberate stillness mid-conversation suggests a shift in power dynamics. Even the way coats are shrugged on, doors are closed, or hands are clenched conveys emotional states and relationships without a single word being said. Voice work across the ensemble adds another dimension. Accents, speech rhythms, and subtle tonal shifts are woven naturally into the narrative rather than performed as theatrical tricks. In moments of confrontation, sentences cut sharp and fast like blades, while private confessions stretch into drawn-out silences where breath carries as much meaning as words. The dialogue feels authentic because the actors inhabit it rather than perform it, and that makes every exchange ring true. The cinematography complements these performances perfectly. often lingering in tight close-ups that demand honesty from the actors. In these moments, even micro-expressions, a twitch of the lip, a dart of the eyes, a tightening grip, become storytelling devices. One late-film confrontation between the lead and co-lead is a standout showcase. One absorbs emotional blows silently while the other lashes out with surgical precision, creating a battle of wills where tension hangs heavier than any physical fight. The ensemble works beautifully as an organic whole, creating a world where every character feels alive even when they're not in the frame. Their histories, grudges, and desires bleed into every decision, and the chemistry among the cast brings authenticity to layered relationships. You can sense years of shared backstory in a single glance, hidden resentment in a passing look, and buried affection in half-finished sentences. By the time the story reaches its most explosive turning points, the performances carry the weight of everything that's been built up before. You don't just witness events, you feel them through the actors' expressions, choices, and silences. It's the kind of ensemble work where nobody tries to overshadow anyone else. Instead, every actor elevates the other, weaving their individual arcs into something bigger, richer, and emotionally devastating. Do you want me to prepare that next? The direction of Eenie Meanie, 2025, is one of its greatest strengths, the kind of filmmaking where you can feel the director's hand shaping every moment, guiding the audience's emotions without ever making it obvious. From the very first frame, the tone is carefully established, a delicate balance of tension, intrigue, and emotional intimacy. Instead of relying on loud cues or over-explaining, the director lets the mood unfold gradually, creating an immersive atmosphere where even silence feels loaded with meaning. There's a sense that every detail on screen has been chosen with intention, and that precision gives the movie its edge. The film plays with contrasts beautifully. Some scenes linger in quiet stillness, letting the tension build slowly, while others hit with sudden bursts of energy that jolt you upright. The director doesn't rush to show you everything at once. Instead, they build suspense by withholding information, forcing you to lean in, study the frame, and pick up on subtle visual cues. The story thrives on this kind of controlled pacing. Early on, the narrative breathes, conversations flow naturally, and the world feels lived in, giving the audience time to form connections with the characters. But as secrets unravel and conflicts deepen, the tempo tightens. Midway through, you can almost feel the grip of the director's control. The pacing sharpens, cuts become faster, and the stakes escalate without losing emotional depth. By the time the film reaches its final act, the storytelling hits a relentless rhythm, pulling you forward with an urgency that keeps you fully locked in, yet never losing clarity. The visual language of Eenie Meanie is another key highlight of the direction. The shot composition is masterful, and every frame tells its own story. Characters are often placed at the edges of the screen, creating unease and signaling shifting power dynamics without saying a word. Wide shots emphasize isolation, vulnerability, and distance, while extreme close-ups capture the smallest flickers of emotion, a twitch of the lip, a glance toward an exit, a tightening grip on a glass. Even the choice of angles reflects psychology. The camera dips low when power shifts, pulls back when secrets loom, and locks onto characters when they're forced to confront uncomfortable truths. The director has a gift for transforming physical space into emotional weight, turning hallways into traps, open fields into stages of confrontation, and even small, mundane rooms into pressure cookers where every decision matters. Stylistically, the film blends classic cinematic techniques with bold, modern experimentation. Long takes are used sparingly but powerfully, trapping viewers in moments of unbearable tension where you want to look away but can't. Handheld camera work slips in during moments of emotional chaos, creating a sense of instability that mirrors what the characters are feeling. In contrast, when control and manipulation dominate the scene, the framing becomes rigid, perfectly symmetrical, and eerily calm, reinforcing the underlying themes of power and dominance. Even transitions between scenes carry meaning. Clever match cuts link characters through visual parallels, while overlapping audio hints at how one person's actions ripple into another's story. Lighting and color design play a crucial role in setting the mood. Cool, desaturated tones dominate early sequences, reflecting uncertainty and distrust, while warmer hues occasionally appear during moments of connection and vulnerability. But the warmth is deceptive. When danger creeps in, the palette shifts subtly, pulling in muted greens and deep shadows that create a sense of unease. The director understands how to use darkness as a narrative tool. Shadows aren't just visual texture here. They symbolize secrets lurking beneath the surface, and negative space is wielded as powerfully as dialogue. Scenes where faces are half-lit become moments of duality, showing us who a character pretends to be and who they truly are. Sound design under this director's vision is equally intentional. Environmental sounds, a squeaking chair, a dripping faucet, the distant hum of machinery, are amplified to make you feel trapped inside the character's heightened awareness. In key scenes, silence dominates, forcing you to focus on expressions and gestures, making even the faintest sound, footsteps, breathing, the creak of a door, carry weight. The score doesn't overwhelm. It threads beneath the narrative like an undercurrent, subtle but effective, rising precisely when emotions peak and retreating when tension demands stillness. Perspective is another powerful storytelling tool here. The director plays with point of view in unexpected ways, sometimes showing you events from one character's perspective, only to later reframe the same moment through someone else's eyes, forcing you to question everything you thought you understood. These shifts aren't gimmicks. They're carefully timed reveals that deepen the emotional stakes and make you reassess every relationship and decision. It's a game of perception versus reality, and the director makes the audience an active participant in decoding the truth. One of the most striking elements is how blocking, the placement and movement of actors, becomes an unspoken language. Characters subtly circle each other in scenes of negotiation, claiming territory without ever raising their voices. In moments of vulnerability, they physically shrink, collapsing inward, while confrontations often force them into close, uncomfortable proximity where unspoken emotions become palpable. Doors, tables, and even the simple act of sitting or standing are used symbolically to show who holds power in any given exchange. What ties everything together is the director's narrative vision. Nothing feels random. Everything, from the pacing to the framing to the way light falls across a character's face, serves the emotional core of the story. The tension doesn't come from loud set pieces or forced drama, but from a slow tightening of the emotional screws, making every choice, every reveal, and every twist hit harder because you're deeply invested in these characters and their journey. The cinematography in Eenie Meanie, 2025, isn't just a visual language. It's the film's heartbeat. Every shot, every movement, every fragment of light and shadow is carefully designed to pull you deeper into the world and immerse you in the tension of the story. The camera doesn't just observe the narrative, it participates in it, reacting to emotions, secrets, and power shifts as if it knows more than the characters themselves. Instead of being loud or overly stylized, the visuals speak in whispers, but those whispers carry weight, and if you pay attention, you realize the cinematography is constantly telling you a story beneath the surface. From the very first frame, the film establishes its visual identity with precision. Early sequences lean into open, wide compositions, giving you a sense of space and calm, almost lulling you into comfort. But this is deceptive. The cinematographer begins tightening the frame subtly as the story progresses, compressing perspectives and crowding the characters inside smaller, narrower visual spaces. It's not just about what you see, it's about what you feel. Those gradual shifts make you subconsciously register a sense of increasing claustrophobia, perfectly reflecting the rising tension in the narrative. It's the kind of careful planning that makes the visuals feel alive, adapting as the stakes evolve. Camera angles are deliberately psychological. When a character is in control, low angles place them against empty ceilings or open skies, giving them quiet dominance without overstating it. When vulnerability sets in, high angles creep in slowly, framing them from above and making them look exposed, isolated, and small within their environment. There are moments where the camera locks dead center on a character, forcing us to confront them head-on, and others where it drifts almost nervously, following them from behind, mimicking their uncertainty and paranoia. A handful of Dutch tilts are used sparingly, but when they appear, they hit hard, distorting the world at exact moments when reality itself feels unstable. Framing is where the cinematography achieves some of its most subtle storytelling. The film constantly plays with thresholds, doors, windows, mirrors, and reflections are used as visual metaphors for choice, perspective, and duality. Characters are framed in ways that box them in, hinting at confinement and consequences they can't escape. Negative space, too, becomes a silent storyteller. In certain scenes, a third of the frame is intentionally left empty, creating an eerie sense of absence, as though the space belongs to something unsaid, a secret, a danger, or a looming shift in the story. Mirrors and glass reflections deepen this visual layering, showing us different versions of the same character, forcing us to question who they are versus who they pretend to be. One of the most impressive techniques used here is rack focusing, but not in the typical, flashy way. Instead, it's handled with patience and meaning. In a heated dialogue, the focus will hold on one character long enough for us to soak in their subtle emotional reactions before shifting, almost reluctantly, to the other person. It's as if the camera itself is weighing loyalties, deciding where to believe the truth lies. There's even a brilliant use of split diopter shots during a confrontation, keeping two characters sharply in focus despite standing at opposite depths. This forces them to share a frame, visually trapping them together even when they emotionally want nothing more than to break free. Lighting design takes the film to another level, transforming mood into something tactile. Naturalistic practical lighting drives most interior scenes, grounding the visuals in authenticity. A buzzing fluorescent light in a backroom bathes everything in a sterile, clinical gray, making even safe spaces feel tense. Sodium street lamps paint alleyways in brassy oranges and sickly greens, giving nighttime scenes an uneasy undertone. Refrigerator doors and neon signs provide quick, unexpected bursts of cold blue against otherwise warm palettes, signaling emotional disconnects or foreshadowing moments of betrayal. Low-key lighting dominates the most suspenseful scenes, carving faces into shifting layers of shadow and light, hiding just enough to leave you searching for truth in the darkness. And when the climax arrives, harsh backlights silhouette the characters, stripping away identity and reducing them to stark, almost abstract figures locked in confrontation. The use of color grading is equally meticulous. In the beginning, the palette leans toward cool tones, pale blues and muted grays that reflect the restrained emotions and guarded secrets of the characters. But as the film progresses and trust fractures, subtle shifts creep in. Sickly greens invade frames where deceit lingers, while deep reds quietly draw attention in scenes where choices will have lasting consequences. It's not a constant saturation of color. Instead, it's controlled, deliberate, and storytelling-driven. A scarf, a taillight, or even a stain on a wall might carry visual importance long before the dialogue confirms it. Movement is another essential storytelling tool. The camera doesn't just show you the story, it feels it. In early scenes, the camera glides smoothly, mirroring the character's sense of control and order. As chaos enters their lives, handheld techniques slowly creep in, destabilizing the frame and making you feel the tension physically. Tracking shots are used to pull you along, placing you directly in step with the characters as they descend deeper into danger, while slow, creeping push-ins transform simple dialogue into unbearable suspense. There's a breathtaking one-take sequence in the second act where the camera floats through an apartment, collecting fragmented visual clues scattered across objects, the photographs, the discarded glass, the partially open drawer, without a single word spoken. By the end of the shot, you know something devastating has shifted, but the film never spells it out. Some of the most visually striking moments stay etched in your mind long after. There's a scene set during a nighttime downpour, where reflections from neon lights bleed across puddles, turning the wet pavement into a mirror of fractured colors. Another unforgettable sequence uses extreme contrast between silence and chaos. The camera stays locked on a character's face in a single tight close-up as you hear distant shouting, footsteps, and doors slamming around them. The world spiraling apart just outside the frame, while their breath slowly quickens in front of us. And in one of the film's most beautifully constructed shots, two characters sit at opposite ends of a hallway, separated by soft shadows and beams of fractured light, the entire scene built around distance, regret, and choices neither of them can take back. Even the inserts, those tiny, blink-and-you-miss-it shots, carry storytelling weight. A trembling hand folding a letter, a half-erased mark on a ledger, a key dangling just slightly longer than it should. These aren't filler shots, they're emotional signposts, designed to make you lean forward and notice what the characters might be missing. The editing in Eenie Meanie, 2025, functions like the film's invisible conductor, shaping tempo and surprise so that the story breathes in one moment and snaps like a trap in the next. The cuts mostly favor continuity, match-on action, careful eyeline matches, and reaction coverage keep dialogue scenes feeling natural. Yet the editor isn't afraid to announce themselves when the drama requires it, inserting sudden jump cuts, brief staccato bursts, or a judicious slow-motion stretch to make a single turn of fate land with the weight of a punch. Transitions are a mix of old-school craft and modern slyness. Sound bridges and overlapping dialogue, L-cuts and J-cuts, are used to carry an emotional thread across scene boundaries so you never feel dropped, while visual match cuts and object-led dissolves create thematic echoes that keep details from earlier scenes resonating later. An object seen twice becomes a clue by the third appearance. The film leans on a handful of long takes to let performances breathe and to build real-time tension. Those stretches where the camera holds and the actors are permitted to live in the frame pay off by making us feel the claustrophobia and the small betrayals, then flips into razor-edged cutting during sequences of discovery or violence, where rapid intercutting multiplies anxiety and makes every blink a choice. Nonlinear passages are handled with editorial intelligence. Flashbacks arrive as rhythmic ellipses rather than clumsy info dumps, often stitched in by a match of movement or a shared sound cue so time jumps feel earned and not decorative. Parallel editing is used to excellent effect when the plot wants to generate dramatic irony, slicing between the protagonist's vulnerable quiet and the antagonist's cold preparation until the audience's knowledge hums like electricity. Pacing is elastic. Early exposition has generous breathing space to let character relationships form. The middle tightens into a ticking clock momentum with montages that compress investigation and mounting consequences into vivid beats, and the final act often breaks into a sprinting montage/sequence of short cuts that ratchet tension to its limit. There are moments when that elasticity becomes visible, where a deliberately languid beat may feel like a drag, a late exposition sequence that lingers on archival material risks softening forward drive, and places where the rush of the finale briefly sacrifices the contemplative silence that earlier made emotional beats land, small trade-offs that feel intentional rather than careless. Rhythm is also musical. Edits accentuate breathing and footsteps, use silence as punctuation, and time cuts to the cadence of patterns in dialogue so a conversation can rise and fall like a score. When the editing slows, it often lingers on micro-expressions, half a blink, a tightening jaw, to convert performance into plot, and when it speeds up, it slices between objective geography and subjective panic, so the viewer feels spatially secure yet emotionally off-balance. Insert shots and cutaways are treated like narrative shorthand rather than filler. Macro close-ups of ink, a key turning, or a smudge on glass become beats that cue change, while montage sequences are carefully sculpted narratively. They compress time without flattening stakes, using rhythm, audio overlaps, and thematic images to preserve emotional continuity. The editor also plays with texture. Occasional jump cuts and abrupt temporal ellipses create jolts that underline the film's unstable moral ground, and hidden cut long takes, cleverly disguised edits inside a glide or a pan, let a moment feel continuous while actually stitching multiple setups into one seamless experience. In scenes of confrontation, the cutting pattern intentionally oscillates, sometimes letting a single master shot hold to milk discomfort, and then unleashing a flurry of close-ups when the truth drops, so the editing itself becomes an argument about who controls the frame and who loses it. Ultimately, the film's editing choreographs attention. It decides when you should study a face, when you should be nudged forward by a tempo change, and when you should be left hanging in silence to build dread, an often playful, sometimes ruthless editorial hand that treats time as malleable and pace as a storytelling tool rather than a metronome to be obeyed. The soundtrack and score of Eenie Meanie, 2025, act like a secret narrator, whispering what the characters won't say out loud and punctuating the film's twists with sonic nudges that make you feel clever for catching them. Rather than sitting politely underneath dialogue, the music is woven into the fabric of the scenes, sometimes barely audible as a low, human breath of a drone, sometimes rushing in with percussive, heart rate-matched hits that make a cut land like a small electric shock. Motifs are used as story markers. A spare three-note motif on piano and treated strings quietly announces a character's loneliness every time it appears, and by the third recurrence the phrase has accumulated history, so the moment it returns it reads like shorthand for everything that character has lost. Instrumentation is smartly contrasted. Acoustic instruments, piano, bowed strings, a lonely clarinet, carry intimacy and memory, while electronic textures, processed field recordings, and metallic percussion introduce friction and menace. The blend keeps the score from feeling purely orchestral or purely synth-driven, and the resulting hybrid sound mirrors the film's mix of the domestic and the dangerous. Dynamics are used dramaturgically. Silence is a weapon. An empty mix after a line of dialogue lets an off-screen footstep register as if the film has suddenly learned how to make you listen, whereas when the score swells, it's surgical, rising only to highlight a betrayal or to underline a truth revealed rather than to tell the audience what to feel. Recurring harmonic gestures, an unresolved fourth here, a brittle cluster there, work like emotional underlines, creating a nagging instability that never lets comfortable resolution sit for long. The composer will often transform a motif across scenes. A bright piano melody in flashback becomes a filtered, slowed nightmare of the same melody later. So the music charts psychological time as well as narrative time. Diegetic sources are cleverly deployed too. A pop song playing on a radio can be cut at the precise second a character lies, turning something ordinary into a cue that makes the audience suspect everything in the shot. Conversely, a hallway's refrigerator hum or an electric kettle is sometimes looped and pitched down to become the backbone of an otherwise non-diegetic underscore, blurring the line between world and score. The score's relationship with editing is tight. The percussion often matches the film's staccato cutting patterns in moments of panic, while long, sustained tones support the film's quieter, single-take stretches, allowing performance and silence to breathe. During montages, the music compresses time with rhythmic ostinatos and layered arpeggios, so that narrative leaps feel energetic rather than confusing. There are standout cues that double as scenes in miniature, an opening theme that gathers small melodic fragments from the score and scatters them across the film like breadcrumbs, a mid-film lullaby-like motif that reappears, distorted, at a crucial reveal to painful effect, and a climactic cue that swaps the main motif into an aggressive, almost percussive arrangement, so the melody itself feels forced to make a choice. Mixing and placement are handled with restraint. Dialogue remains intelligible because the score favors frequency bands that complement voices rather than compete with them, and when the music is meant to overwhelm, it deliberately pushes into low end and reverb, so the sound feels physical, pressing against the body like an approaching storm. Subtle production tricks enrich the palette. Bowed cymbals and granular synthesis give edges to what would otherwise be standard string writing, and occasional use of non-musical textures, metal clanks, taped radio interference, city ambience, are integrated into the score's percussion so the soundtrack sounds like the city's heartbeat as much as it does a composer's statement. Thematic economy is a strength. The film rarely introduces new themes gratuitously. Instead, small motifs evolve and accrue meaning, so by the film's later stages, a simple chord or harmonic color callback reads like a narrative reveal. Above all, the music behaves like a collaborator rather than an adornment. It nudges perspective shifts, cues unspoken motives, and timing choices between music and silence feel like a game the film plays with the viewer, rewarding attention and making emotional beats land with the precision of a well-aimed cut. Eenie Meanie, 2025, digs at its themes with a careful, almost forensic curiosity, asking questions about trust, identity, and consequence without turning them into lecture points. Trust and betrayal thread through the plot like a slow-burning fuse. Characters make ordinary choices that accumulate into moral debts, and the film constantly tests the currency of promises by putting small favors, withheld information, and compassionate lies under a microscope so that personal loyalty becomes indistinguishable from survival strategy. Identity and the masks people wear are explored not just through dialogue but through visual echoes, mirrors, framed thresholds, and costume choices repeatedly ask whether who a character appears to be is who they truly are, and the cinematography and editing reinforce this by reframing the same moment from different perspectives until identity feels plural rather than fixed. Power and control appear in both intimate and structural forms. Scenes that stage one-on-one conversations quietly double as commentaries on institutional force, showing how ordinary bureaucracies and neighborhood hierarchies exert pressure as effectively as overt threats, and the film uses spatial metaphors, narrow hallways, desks, and doorways, to map who gets to move and who gets boxed in. Memory and the past surface as motifs, recurring objects, a faded photograph, a ledger entry, a particular scarf, serve as anchors that make the past tactile, and the score's recurring musical fragments function like emotional fingerprints, so every return of the motif carries with it accumulated guilt or longing. Moral ambiguity is celebrated rather than resolved. Characters rarely inhabit neat archetypes, and most choices force you to weigh competing goods, safety versus honesty, self-preservation versus sacrifice, which keeps the ethical landscape messy and human. The film quietly interrogates storytelling itself, playing with perspective and unreliable narration to suggest that truth is often a construction of who gets to tell it and when, and this meta layer is reinforced by the director's decision to replay scenes from altered viewpoints rather than hand the audience a single authoritative account. Smallness and scale are juxtaposed. Intimate personal betrayals have ripple effects that reach beyond the characters' lives into community tensions, making the film a study of how micro-decisions compound into systemic consequences. Themes of redemption and culpability are stitched through character arcs that rarely offer tidy absolution. Instead, the film lets regret be an ongoing process, showing attempts at repair, the stubbornness of old habits, and the cost of trying to change. Visual and sonic elements amplify these ideas. Light falling across half-lit faces to imply divided loyalties, the kettle or a hum turning into rhythmic score elements to suggest obsession or fear, and repeated camera placements that make thresholds feel like moral tests. There are moments where the film chooses clarity over subtlety, briefly spelling out its themes in dialogue or montage in ways that can feel didactic, but mostly those moments read as emphatic punctuation within a narrative that prefers implication. The thematic architecture is layered so that attentive viewers can trace motifs across sound, image, and performance, and the result is a film that leaves a persistent aftertaste. Questions that keep nudging at you. Who owns the truth? How far will we go to protect ourselves? And which small choices quietly define us? The visual effects and CGI in Eenie Meanie, 2025, behave less like fireworks and more like ghostly stagehands, quiet, unseen, and essential, working behind the scenes to sell a world that feels tactile and lived in rather than digital and pasted on. Practical effects are the anchor. On-set rain, handheld wind, real squibs, prosthetic touches for bruises and scars, and carefully choreographed stunts create physical reality for the actors to react to, and those tactile elements make every close-up read as honest. The digital team mostly plays support, extending sets, cleaning up rigs and wires, and amplifying atmosphere. Plate fixes, set extensions, and invisible matte paintings push studio walls into believable cityscapes while photogrammetry and HDRI captures let CG light behave like the location lighting, so the composites sit in the frame naturally. When action demands something impossible or unsafe, digital doubles step in, but they're used sparingly and smartly. Wide-moving stunt work is often a blend of real stunt performance and subtle digital augmentation, stitching body parts, smoothing motion, and adding motion blur and contact shadows so the audience never suspects a swap. Particle sims and volumetrics are the unsung stars for atmosphere. Rain, mist, cigarette smoke, embers, and fine dust are simulated and layered to interact with practical light sources, creating those neon reflective puddles and smeared headlights that made the night chase sequences feel claustrophobic and tactile. The compositing is disciplined. Multi-layered nuke passes, careful matte edges, and color-matched grain-mean lens artifacts and filmic flares are recreated in CG so reflections and highlights read as if they were captured optically, and match-moving/3D tracking ensure that CG elements obey the camera's every micromotion. Sometimes the VFX are deliberately visible. For dreamlike flashbacks or psychological fractures, the grade will peel. The CG will desaturate or smudge reality, and particle-driven distortions will sell subjective unreliability. But most of the time the effects are invisible craftsmanship, wire removal, set cleanup, and subtle digital bruising that elevate performances without calling attention to themselves. Integration with other departments is crucial. The VFX team works off on-set reference plates, calibrated color cards, and careful lens reports, so subsurface scattering on a character's cheek or the specular sheen on wet asphalt matches the DP's lighting intent, and the editorial rhythm helps hide seams by cutting at moments where motion blur and depth of field obscure pixel-level detail. Where the film risks slipping into CGI showcase territory, it pulls back. Shallow depth of field, smoke, and low light are used strategically to mask any uncanny moments, and practical texture, dirt, water spray, fabric wear is emphasized in close-ups so digital finishes read as grime rather than polish. Sound design and the score also conspire with the VFX. The tactile thump of a digital impact, the wet clap of a CG splash, or a repitched practical sound layered under a simulated environment sells the illusion physically as well as visually. There are standout sequences where VFX do heavy narrative lifting. The rain-soaked intersection with doubled neon reflections, a subtle reflection reveal in a cracked mirror, and a few late-game environmental collapses where set extension and particle work create genuine peril. But even these moments feel like natural escalations of what's been built practically from the start. The few shortcomings are predictable. Overcleaned CG edges or slightly soft digital doubles in rapid motion, but they're minor against a body of work that favors restraint, and the result is a picture where effects enhance immersion instead of breaking it. If you'd like, I can go deeper and map which scenes rely on which techniques: practical versus digital, plate-based fixes, particle sims, digital doubles, to show exactly how the VFX pipeline supports the story. The set design and locations in Eenie Meanie, 2025, function less like backdrops and more like active collaborators in the story. Each room, street, and object chosen to reveal character, history, and mood without ever needing to be spelled out. From the start, production design speaks in texture and scale. Peeling wallpaper, threadbare upholstery, and the specific dents on a kitchen table tell you more about a life than any line of dialogue. Interiors are layered. Lived-in kitchens have mismatched mugs, a stack of dog-eared bills, a child's half-finished homework tucked under a coaster. These micro-details are treated like clues that reward close watching and create a tactile authenticity that keeps the eye busy even during quiet moments. Locations are curated to underline the emotional geography of the story. Cramped apartments with low ceilings and crooked picture frames produce a sense of suffocation, while a wide, glass-fronted office with clinical furnishings conveys the sterile, performative power of an antagonist. Thresholds are a recurring motif in the design. Door frames, stair landings, and narrow corridors are staged to visualize decisions and power shifts, so a character lingering in a doorway reads like an unresolved choice. Public spaces, a neighborhood bar, a market stall, a rain-slick intersection, are shot and dressed with social detail that signals class and community dynamics. Graffiti, taped notices, the particular way goods are stacked, signage with localized wear. Those cues anchor the film's world in specificity rather than generic, urban grit. Practicality and cinematic need are balanced cleverly. Many interiors are built as modular sets on stage to allow for camera movement and blocking, while location shoots are selected for architectural features that the director and DP can exploit. A long hallway that becomes a visual trap, a courtyard that naturally divides characters into factions. The production design teams think in layers that will survive close-ups and wide shots alike. furniture placement for eye lines, prop positions for rack focus reveals, and surface textures that catch light and register in close-up, stains, scuffs, frayed edges. Props serve narrative duties beyond propsness. Recurring objects, a ledger, a chipped mug, a faded photograph, an old scarf, accumulate meaning as they move between characters and scenes, functioning as visual leitmotifs and payoffs when revealed later. Practical effects merge with design choices. Set-built windows with rain rigs produce believable dampness that interacts with neon reflections. Breakaway fixtures are integrated into furniture for stunt beats, and hidden rigging points are concealed within set dressing for safe, invisible actor movement. The production's approach to aging and wear is deliberate. Nothing looks brand new. Finishes are scuffed in ways that suggest real use. Dust collects in predictable places, and paint layers reveal renovations and neglect that hint at backstories. Color and material choices are coordinated with costume and cinematography teams so that a character's environment echoes their emotional palette. A muted, cool-toned apartment foregrounds restraint, while an overly warm, overlit diner hides its wrought under syrupy golds. Sound-friendly design decisions show in the details. Floorboards creak where tension should be audible, metal staircases provide a metallic bite to footsteps in pursuit scenes, and practical lighting fixtures are chosen not only for look, but for the hum or flicker they can contribute to the soundscape. Where digital extension is needed, the VFX and art departments collaborate early. Partial facades and horizon plates are dressed practically so that digital matte paintings can be seamlessly stitched, and on-set reference textures ensure CG additions carry the same grime and patina as physical sets. Locations also evolve with the characters. Dressing elements shift subtly after key events. A photo removed from a mantle, a chair turned away from a table, visually charting change without expository beats. Standout set pieces are designed to be both memorable and functional. A rain-soaked intersection that doubles as a mirror for fractured identity, a cluttered backroom that reveals a character's hidden obsessions through layered props, and a warehouse sequence where practical architecture and lighting build claustrophobia before the camera even cuts. Continuity and production-level thinking are evident. Props are keyed and tracked so that a small object seen in close-up on day one will be in the same place in later takes, and sightlines are engineered for complex blocking so that the camera can move logically while preserving the illusion of lived space. Even the smallest inserts are purposeful: a dented key, a smudge, a coffee ring, and the cumulative effect is a world that feels made, owned, and inhabited. If you want a scene-by-scene map of how the production design supports story beats, I can break down each major location and list the props, textures, and visual motifs that do the heavy lifting for the narrative. The script of Eenie Meanie, 2025, speaks like real people who have practiced hiding things from each other. It's economical where it needs to be, generous where emotion must breathe, and brilliantly tuned to subtext so that what's not said carries as much weight as the lines themselves. Each character has a distinct voice. The lead speaks in clipped, cautious sentences that reveal control and private calculation. The co-lead snaps with nervous, elliptical wit that betrays restlessness. Supporting players are given their own vocabularies. A neighbor who softens every sentence with a local idiom. An administrator whose bureaucratic cadence becomes passive aggression. That make the ensemble feel like a neighborhood rather than a cast list. The script trusts actors and the camera to find nuance, so it rarely spells everything out. Instead, exposition is earned through exchanges about trivial things, a wrong coffee order, an offhand joke about a street name, that double as narrative breadcrumbs. Comedy is threaded through danger. Witty one-liners land in tense scenes not to undercut them, but to reveal coping strategies, while longer, quieter moments of humor deepen empathy rather than distract. Emotional beats are handled with restraint. The screenplay reserves big speeches for rare, seismic moments and prefers micro-ruptures, a withheld answer, a swallowed retort, a repeated phrase that shifts meaning each time it appears. Dialogue often overlaps and interrupts, which mimics real conversational power plays and allows editorial rhythms to play with tension. The editor can cut into a second speaker's unfinished sentence, and the meaning changes, turning a simple turn of phrase into a plot pivot. There's clever use of leitmotifs in language. Small phrases and nicknames recur. A accruing baggage, so that by the third repetition, a throwaway line reads like a landmine. When nonlinear storytelling reframes a scene, the rewritten or recontextualized lines reveal how perspective shapes truth, and the script weaponizes unreliable memory by letting characters contradict themselves in ways that feel human rather than contrived. The balance between showing and telling is handled skillfully. Object-driven dialogue, conversations about a ledger, a damaged photograph, a coffee stain. Let's props do exposition duty so conversations don't feel like info dumps, and when the script must convey backstory, it does so through layered hints and triggered memories rather than monologue-heavy flashbacks. When monologues do appear, they land because the setup has earned them. Language registers are carefully chosen. No one sounds like a cartoon. Even the villain's polite threats are written as domestic, intimate sentences that become terrifying by contrast. The screenplay also writes silence as texture. Beats are annotated not as empty gaps, but as conversational punctuation that actors can inhabit, and many scenes depend on the rhythm of pause and glance more than on speech. Small roles get crisp, purposeful lines that define them immediately and often flip later, so a bartender's throwaway comment will echo in a climactic scene and feel like payoff rather than coincidence. There are moments where the script leans into clarity a touch too hard. Late exposition scenes that tidy up loose threads can read a little instructional, but those are rare interruptions in otherwise sharp writing. The dialogue sits beautifully with the film's visual language. It gives room for close-ups and long takes, it provides hooks for sound design to repeat, and it supplies editors with rhythm markers to speed up or slow down tempo. Above all, the writing invites you into conversations rather than lectures. It makes you a participant who's eavesdropping on stakes that feel both intimate and consequential, and the cumulative effect is a script that's as much about the spaces between words as about the words themselves. Eenie Meanie, 2025, thrives on its genre-bending execution, blending psychological suspense, dark comedy, and slow-burn thriller elements into a structure that constantly plays with audience expectations. At its core, the film promises one thing but keeps revealing another, reshaping its genre identity as the narrative unfolds. Instead of sticking to a predictable formula where the setup leads to an obvious confrontation and resolution, the story evolves like a puzzle, withholding key information and daring viewers to piece it together. The opening act establishes what feels like a straightforward domestic drama with undertones of unease, a small-town setting, ordinary routines, and seemingly harmless interactions between neighbors, but subtle tonal shifts start dripping tension into the atmosphere. This ambiguity becomes the film's strength. It doesn't rely on jump scares or heavy exposition but uses mood, silence, and perspective changes to craft suspense that lingers rather than jolts. The thriller elements are cleverly woven into the storytelling without leaning on cliches. When danger appears, it doesn't announce itself with loud musical cues or exaggerated villain tropes. Instead, the tension comes from layered human behavior, the wrong glance at the wrong moment, the unspoken accusation in a casual exchange, or the tiny inconsistencies in what characters claim to know. The film uses misdirection masterfully. Key scenes are framed to make the audience assume one character holds power, only for the following sequence to upend that assumption entirely. This constant shifting of control builds a sense of unease, keeping viewers guessing about who's manipulating whom and why. Humor also has a deliberate place here, but it's not the kind of humor that breaks the tension, it tightens it. The comedic beats come from awkward interactions, uncomfortable silences, and darkly absurd moments that make you laugh because you feel the pressure building beneath them. These instances of levity never derail the suspense, they enhance it, making the tense moments feel sharper and the emotional stakes more layered. It's a tonal balancing act that keeps the film from feeling heavy-handed or one-dimensional. The drama underpins everything, grounding the story's mysteries in very human conflicts rather than relying purely on external threats. This isn't a world of cartoon villains and invincible heroes. Motivations are messy, relationships are fractured, and alliances shift depending on new discoveries. Even the antagonist's presence is constructed with restraint, keeping them enigmatic for much of the runtime, which makes every reveal more impactful when the layers finally peel back. Rather than leaning into traditional genre shortcuts, the film constantly builds complexity within its characters, making their personal histories just as suspenseful as the central plot itself. Stylistically, the film blends genre codes rather than following them, refusing to commit fully to one lane. The pacing mirrors this unpredictability. Slow, almost meditative stretches of quiet tension give way to sudden bursts of movement and confrontation, never letting the viewer settle into a rhythm. Scenes that seem to offer emotional resolution are deliberately undercut, keeping the narrative alive with unresolved questions. There are even moments where the film toys with thriller cliches only to dismantle them immediately, turning what could have been predictable sequences into opportunities for surprise. What makes the genre execution so effective is how organically the shifts are integrated. You never feel the film is forcing twists for the sake of cleverness. Every tonal pivot, every layer of suspense, and every injection of humor emerges naturally from the characters' decisions and emotional states. By the time the narrative reaches its later stages, the blending of psychological tension, moral ambiguity, and darkly ironic beats creates an experience that feels more immersive than formulaic. Eenie Meanie, 2025, doesn't just entertain. It slides deep under the skin by weaving a sharp layer of social and cultural commentary into its suspense-driven narrative. Rather than preaching or breaking immersion, it folds these ideas into the story's bones, making the audience engage with uncomfortable questions without realizing they've been pulled into the debate. At its core, the film interrogates power, privilege, and survival, how systems decide who gets to escape and who gets trapped. Through character dynamics, we see sharp contrasts between those insulated by wealth, influence, or connections, and those who live on the margins, constantly negotiating invisible rules designed to keep them there. The script cleverly avoids broad stereotypes. Instead, it examines microaggressions, hidden hierarchies, and unspoken agreements between people from different social strata. Every casual remark, every ignored plea, every polite refusal carries weight because beneath the tension, the film is talking about how society chooses who matters and who doesn't. It also taps into generational divides. The younger characters carry a quiet rage born from watching promises of stability collapse, while older figures cling to outdated notions of morality and control. This clash is not delivered as melodrama but embedded in choices characters make when pushed to extremes. The film even flirts with themes of surveillance and digital footprints, reflecting a world where privacy is myth and every online trace becomes potential leverage. One scene where a seemingly insignificant text exchange changes the trajectory of an entire subplot lands like a punch to the gut. Class and culture bleed into visual storytelling. The locations, costumes, and even sound design mirror societal segmentation, letting the environment reflect economic tension without characters explicitly naming it. There's also an undercurrent about collective complicity. Characters who remain silent when they see harm done, institutions protecting themselves instead of the vulnerable, and the moral trade-offs individuals make when survival feels more important than solidarity. But what makes this commentary effective is subtlety. The filmmakers resist the temptation to sermonize, instead trusting audiences to pick up cues from behavior, framing, and dialogue. Even humor is weaponized. Witty exchanges often expose cultural absurdities and hypocrisy, making you laugh before realizing the line has teeth. In moments where injustice sharpens, the tension doesn't just come from plot stakes, but from the deeper recognition that what you're watching reflects dynamics playing out in the real world right now. Sensitive topics, economic disparity, systemic failures, personal accountability, are handled with restraint and nuance, often leaving space for ambiguity rather than providing clear moral resolutions. This refusal to simplify makes the story linger long after the credits roll, forcing viewers to question where they stand within the very systems the film critiques. By embedding cultural commentary seamlessly into its character arcs, dialogue, and conflicts, Eenie Meanie transforms genre thrills into something layered, provocative, and uncomfortably familiar. Eenie Meanie, 2025, stands out in its genre by taking familiar elements and reshaping them into something refreshingly unpredictable. At first glance, it feels like it could belong in the same family as psychological thrillers like Prisoners, Gone Girl, or Nightcrawler, but the film refuses to settle into a single tonal lane. Where many thrillers rely heavily on formula, structured twists, predictable pacing, and neatly tied resolutions, this one thrives on ambiguity and tension that refuses to resolve cleanly. It constantly toys with audience expectations, leading viewers down a path that seems familiar only to suddenly twist in a direction that redefines the entire narrative. Compared to other films in its genre, Eenie Meanie leans less on spectacle and more on subtle manipulation of perspective. Instead of constantly throwing visual chaos at the screen, the film lets its power lie in restraint. Its suspense builds gradually, almost uncomfortably, in the quiet moments rather than relying solely on action-driven crescendos. If you've seen something like Sicario or Zodiac, you'll recognize a similar slow burn intensity, but Eenie Meanie takes that methodology and folds in sharper emotional stakes and richer psychological depth. It forces the audience to pay attention, rewarding those who engage closely with the smallest gestures, glances, and seemingly throwaway lines that later hold immense meaning. When compared to the director's previous work, this movie feels like an evolution rather than repetition. While the earlier films carried a strong sense of atmosphere and tension, Eenie Meanie sharpens those instincts and amplifies them with bolder storytelling choices. Where past projects might have relied on clean resolutions or more traditional genre arcs, this film thrives in the gray areas, embracing moral complexity, fractured perspectives, and decisions without obvious right answers. It demonstrates a filmmaker more confident in bending structure, allowing silence, visual cues, and emotional restraint to carry weight instead of leaning on exposition. Against its contemporaries in 2025, Eenie Meanie also distinguishes itself with its handling of character-driven suspense. While many modern thrillers opt for rapid pacing, non-stop twists, and high-concept hooks, this one opts for precision over volume. It doesn't try to overwhelm the audience. It invites them to lean in closer. Unlike more formulaic genre pieces where characters exist primarily to serve the plot, here the narrative and emotional arcs are intertwined. The tension doesn't just stem from external stakes but from internal conflicts, layered relationships, and shifting alliances that make every interaction meaningful. Whereas films like The Girl on the Train or The Little Things present twists for shock value, Eenie Meanie treats its surprises as an organic extension of character psychology and narrative logic. Every revelation deepens your understanding of the story rather than cheapening it with forced drama. This balance between unpredictability and authenticity is rare in the genre and positions the film as something uniquely memorable rather than just another entry in a crowded thriller landscape. It also experiments with tone in a way that few similar movies dare to attempt. Moments of unexpected humor or warmth are strategically woven into an otherwise tense narrative, preventing emotional fatigue and making the darker sequences hit even harder. This tonal fluidity gives it a dynamic rhythm that feels closer to life, messy, unpredictable, and layered with contradictions. While most thrillers commit to a single emotional register, Eenie Meanie thrives in switching gears without ever losing focus on its central themes. Eenie Meanie, 2025, thrives on audience engagement by crafting an experience that refuses to let viewers sit back passively. From its opening sequence, the film hooks you with tension that doesn't just exist on screen but spills into your own heartbeat. Every scene feels meticulously designed to provoke a reaction, sometimes laughter, sometimes discomfort, sometimes outright shock, but never indifference. The unpredictable nature of the plot plays a huge role in keeping the audience invested. Just when you think you've figured out where the story is heading, a single choice, a glance, or a twist throws everything into chaos, forcing you to question your assumptions. This unpredictability creates an immersive experience where viewers feel like participants rather than spectators, constantly recalibrating their emotional compass as new revelations surface. The emotional resonance comes not from melodrama but from authenticity. Moments of grief, betrayal, and desperation are layered into the narrative so naturally that they don't feel staged, they feel lived in. For some, a quiet exchange between characters will hit harder than the film's most shocking reveals because the emotions are raw, restrained, and relatable. Laughter, too, finds its way into the story in surprising bursts, often through sharp dialogue or situational irony, giving the audience brief relief before pulling them right back into the suspense. This balance between intensity and levity keeps viewers emotionally engaged without overwhelming them, creating a rhythm that mirrors real-life tension where fear and humor coexist. The film also builds an atmosphere of shared anticipation. In theaters, you can almost feel the collective energy rise during key turning points, a silence heavy enough to make you hold your breath, an audible gasp at an unexpected twist, or a ripple of nervous laughter when tension threatens to snap. These are the moments that bond the audience together, pulling everyone into the same emotional current, regardless of individual perspectives or backgrounds. At home, the engagement works differently, but just as effectively, encouraging rewinds to catch subtle clues you might have missed and sparking discussions about hidden meanings long after the credits roll. What elevates Eenie Meanie further is its invitation for deeper reflection. It doesn't hand over all the answers neatly. Instead, it plants questions in your mind about morality, choices, and consequences. The ambiguity of certain character motivations ensures that audiences leave with differing interpretations, which in turn fuels debates online and off. It's the kind of movie that lingers because you're compelled to talk about it, what it means, what it reveals, and what you might have overlooked the first time. And therein lies one of its greatest strengths. Repeat viewing isn't just rewarding, it's almost necessary. Tiny visual cues, lines of dialogue, and subtle performance details take on entirely new meaning once you understand the bigger picture. The film understands that engagement isn't about spectacle alone, it's about connection. By letting viewers see themselves reflected in the characters' fears, ambitions, and regrets, it creates an emotional tether that lasts beyond the runtime. Even the silences, the unspoken tensions between characters, the heavy pauses before a critical decision, carry emotional weight, giving audiences time to breathe and process before being pulled back under by the narrative's grip. That ability to manipulate pacing and emotional intensity so precisely makes watching Eenie Meanie feel less like observing a story and more like living inside it. Symbolism in Eenie Meanie, 2025, works like a quiet undercurrent, the film's secret grammar that nudges feeling and meaning without ever lecturing the viewer. Recurring motifs, thresholds, mirrors, hands, small objects, and specific sounds act as shorthand so that every time the camera returns to a door, a cracked photo, or a trembling key, you're not simply seeing set dressing but watching the story think out loud. Doors and windows are everywhere, and they're never neutral. A character paused in a doorway becomes a living punctuation mark, a threshold that literalizes choice and hesitation, and long shots that push people to the frame's edge visually encode marginalization and power imbalance. Mirrors and reflections do double duty, sometimes literal, a face split by cracked pane, and sometimes metaphoric, reflected neon that multiplies a character's options into a chorus of possible selves, so identity feels plural and unstable rather than fixed. Hands are treated like characters of their own. Who touches, who conceals, who refuses a handshake, who lets an object slip back into a pocket. These micro-gestures accumulate into a nonverbal ledger of trust or betrayal. Speaking of ledgers, certain props are narrative talismans. The faded photograph that reappears in different rooms, the ledger with a thumb-smudged entry, the scarf passed between people. Each object accrues history and emotional weight as it moves through scenes, becoming a visual echo that pays off later because the film trusts your memory. Time is encoded visually and orally. Clocks, weather, and a recurring kettle hum or buzzing fluorescent light mark temporal thresholds and psychological knots. A slow, low hum becomes a motif that signals rising pressure, and small edits that match those hums make the soundscape itself a symbolic meter for anxiety. Color is never decorative. Cool slate tones imply control and detachment early on. Warm amber intrudes when safety is performative, and a recurring sickly green or a sudden pull of red isolates moments of moral corruption or consequence so that a single red scarf or a taillight becomes a narrative arrow. Spatial design doubles as metaphor. Narrow hallways, low ceilings, and boxed-in interiors are not just claustrophobic aesthetic choices, but visual arguments about the character's limited options and social constraints, while open, glass-fronted spaces expose performative power and institutional coldness. The film also uses mirror structure and visual parallelism, match cuts and repeated compositions that place different characters in the same frame geometry to suggest that different lives are variations on the same moral equation, and when a sequence is later replayed through another point of view, those identical framings flip their meaning and force you to rewrite what you thought you understood. Music and sonic motifs transform too. The piano three-note figure that began as loneliness becomes, when distorted and slowed, a motif of guilt. Diegetic sounds like a radio song or a clinking glass are occasionally looped or pitch-shifted into the underscore, so world sounds become psychological signposts. Even costume and texture are symbolic. Worn collars, mismatched hems, tiny stains, signifiers of past compromises and eroded dignity that tell backstory without dialogue. The film is economical with literal metaphors, preferring layered microsymbols that compound across scenes so that a small insert shot, a key turning, ink bleeding on a page, a hand hesitating over a light switch, reads like a drumbeat of consequence. These visual refrains reward repeat viewing because their meaning accrues rather than explained. When the story leans into subjectivity, flashbacks or dreamlike fractures, CG and graded colorwork smear reality on purpose, using visual distortion as metaphor for memory's unreliability and trauma's residue. Importantly, symbolism here supports the main themes: trust and betrayal, identity and power, complicity and memory. Rather than smothering them, the film uses metaphors to complicate ethical readings, so characters' choices resonate as moral arithmetic, ledgers, balances, thresholds, rather than tidy moralizing, and the result is a symbolic architecture that keeps nudging the viewer to ask who owns the truth, where responsibility lives, and which small, repeatable gestures quietly define a life. If Eenie Meanie, 2025, sits inside a franchise, it plays like a clever middle chapter that both answers old questions and quietly shifts the chessboard for what comes next. It deepens character backstories in ways that reframe earlier motivations. Small revelations about a protagonist's past become interpretive lenses for previous installments. It introduces new organizational structures or locales that expand the world building rather than merely repeating familiar sets, and it drops connective tissue, recurring symbols, offhand names, and props that double as Easter eggs, so devoted viewers get the payoff of recognition while newcomers aren't left stranded. The film can function as a tonal pivot too, choosing to humanize an archetypal figure or to darken the series' moral palette, and those choices ripple across the franchise because sequels will either accept the new groundwork or push back against it. Clever placement of narrative hooks, a mid-credit scene, an ambiguous decision by a major player, or an unexplained artifact keeps the franchise options open without feeling like stunt writing. It may also rework continuity, retconning certain events with a new perspective rather than erasing them so that the saga feels layered instead of linear. Companion media, tie-in comics, podcasts, or official dossiers can be seeded to expand lore for fans who want to chase every breadcrumb. If the film is a prequel, it can supply origin mythology that retroactively enriches the original entries. If it's a sequel, it can show the cost of prior choices, allowing legacy characters to evolve or fracture in believable ways that keep the overall saga emotionally anchored. On the other hand, if Eenie Meanie functions as a historical film, its success depends on a delicate balance between fidelity and dramaturgy. Production design, costumes, language register, and background detail either immerse you in a convincingly lived past, or they jar you out of it if anachronisms slip through. The movie can score authenticity by incorporating archival textures, period-accurate furniture, real-era signage, the grain and color of photographic plates, while using selective dramatization, compressed timelines, composite characters, invented dialogues, to preserve narrative momentum. Those compressions are honest storytelling choices when they serve thematic truth rather than cheap spectacle. But they deserve scrutiny because dramatization can reshape public memory. Consulting historians, sourcing primary documents, and transparently acknowledging fictionalized elements in marketing or program notes are ways the film can respect its source material while still creating cinematic tension. Conversely, romanticizing or simplifying complex social realities weakens credibility and flattens the moral stakes the story wants to probe. Whether franchise or historical, the film's contextual moves, what it chooses to reveal, omit, or amplify, determine whether it enriches an ongoing mythology or deepens public understanding of a past moment. Layered callbacks, carefully placed retcons, and honest dramatizations invite rewatching and scholarly conversation alike, while lazy continuity fixes or ahistorical glamorizing risk turning momentum into controversy. Eenie Meanie's financial story reads like a clever case study in how smarts and taste can multiply dollars. On paper, it plays like a mid-budget thriller that never pretends to be a tentpole, but on screen it looks richer than its line items because the production funneled money into visible, value-heavy areas, practical sets that photograph like million-dollar locations, carefully chosen cast members who bring credibility without superstar salaries, tight VFX used only where they matter, and a cinematography/production design team that squeezed production value from texture and light rather than expensive spectacle. That kind of spending discipline usually buys two things: higher perceived quality and a lower break-even point, and those are the ingredients of a sleeper hit. Box office results for a film like this hinge less on headline grosses and more on return on investment. A modest theatrical opening amplified by festival buzz and word of mouth can translate into profitability once you add international sales, streaming and TV windows, and post-theatrical licensing. Marketing is the make or break lever. A smart campaign that teases mystery, leans into the movie's tonal hooks, and targets the right demographics, late-night thriller fans, indie cinephiles, urban audiences, can turn curiosity into cue lines. Conversely, a scattershot campaign or launch against a franchise juggernaut can bury a quality film before it finds its crowd. Ancillary revenue often tells the rest of the story. PVOD deals, a timely streaming rights sale, and international distributors who appreciate the film's local textures can more than make up for an underwhelming domestic opening. Timing and distribution strategy matter too. A compact, platformed rollout, select theaters then wide, preserves buzz and reduces marketing burn, while a wide release with poor support wastes prints and press. Finally, reputational effects, strong critical response, awards, festival laurels, and social media chatter compound earnings by turning casual viewers into evangelists. If Eenie Meanie landed those, its financial arc likely climbed from respectable to pleasantly surprising, and if it didn't, the same qualities that critics praise would at least guarantee healthy long-tail revenue across streaming and rights sales, making the picture less of a gamble and more of a slow-burn asset for the studio and producers. Catching Eenie Meanie isn't just about hitting play, it's about choosing the setting that does justice to its mood, energy, and tension. If it's still running in theaters, that's where the experience feels most immersive. This is the kind of film where sharp sound design, layered score, and carefully framed visuals all deserve a proper surround sound setup and a darkened room big enough to swallow distractions. The contrast-heavy cinematography and precise use of silence gain a whole new weight when you're not competing with phone notifications or kitchen noise. The tension lands heavier, and the quiet scenes breathe deeper when you watch them on a massive screen where every glance, shadow, and subtle camera movement gets the space it deserves. But if it's already shifted to streaming platforms, the strategy changes. For a film this layered, on-demand viewing isn't just a fallback, it's a second wave of discovery. Pick a streaming service offering the highest resolution possible and a clean audio mix, the kind where you can replay specific sequences and catch details you missed the first time around, from little foreshadowing clues tucked into the production design to nuanced performances, where a single-line delivery carries hidden meaning. For those who prefer ownership over access, digital rentals and purchases open the door to your own pace, perfect if you're the type who likes pausing, rewinding, and analyzing scenes frame by frame without pressure. And if you're patient, keeping an eye on premium video-on-demand windows pays off because these tend to arrive early, weeks before standard streaming subscriptions pick the film up. Beyond the technicalities, mood matters too. This isn't a background watch while you scroll or multitask. It's the kind of narrative that rewards attention, quiet, and atmosphere. A late-night setup with the lights dimmed and a sound system turned up enough to catch the sub-bass rumble of the score replicates, something close to the theatrical effect, and it lets the tension creep into the room naturally. The viewing platform you choose doesn't just change where you watch Eenie Meanie. It shapes how the story lands, how the characters register, and how the twists hit when they finally unspool.